Hi, and thanks for joining me today. Max asked me the question, why do you have three motorbikes? And the joke is because I sold three last week. But here I am out on my Hunter, which is my latest acquisition. And, this is a perfect route. It's the back route along the. And this is a perfect route. And this is a perfect route for the Hunter. It's the back road on the south side of Loch Tay. But today I thought I'd give you an overview of my motorcycling history and why it's my favourite hobby. So starting with this picture, which is actually a Ford Escort van, because my motorcycling history gets off to a really bad start. When I graduated from college and got my first job, it was a 20-mile commute from Edinburgh to Livingston, there and back each day. And I thought, well, I'll get a motorbike. So I went and had a look at a number of bikes and decided I'd go for a Honda. So I went to Honda, which the two-wheel shop, which at the time was just down from the Commonwealth Pool. And I asked if I could buy one of their learner bikes. And I wanted to take out a loan to buy the bike and all of the equipment. So I filled in all the forms and I got a phone call saying so I filled in all the forms and then I returned a few days later to be told my loan request had been rejected. The reason being, I hadn't been in my job long enough, and I hadn't lived in the. So the reason they gave me was my credit score was too low because I hadn't been in my job long enough. I hadn't lived in the same house for long enough, and probably also the fact that I had a massive credit card bill from being a student. So I tried to borrow the money from my mum and dad, and my mum absolutely refused, saying I should never ride a motorbike. It was too dangerous, and they wouldn't lend me the money. But my dad said instead he would lend me an old van of his. So that's why you can see a picture of a Ford Escort van. So I had that for nearly a year, and after I sort of managed to clear my credit card bill, I then went and bought a Fiat 128. And the reason I bought that was it was the same price as a motorbike. And the commute to Livingston, I found out in winter time, was not very nice. And I didn't actually want to commute by motorbike. So my first attempt to get into motorbiking really was a disaster. So a few years later, when I moved house to the edge of the ring road in Edinburgh, Gilmerton, I decided that I'd get a motorbike to commute in and out of work, which was in the centre of town then, so it was like 5 or 6 miles through city traffic. So I bought a 125 second hand to get me through my test. I only kept that bike for, I think, 6 months, and then wanted something a little bit more powerful and also something that I didn't have to manage the chain. And I bought a second-hand Kawasaki 305. And now that bike was, pretty good for what I was using it for, and, commuting in and out of town. But I was persuaded by my brother-in-law that going on holiday would be a good thing, and he'd been a lifelong biker. So I traded in the 305 against a Kawasaki GT550, and I loved that bike. That was, the shaft drive. I wanted a bit more wind protection for when we were going to go touring around Europe. So I bought a power bronze. So I bought a power bronze fairing and fitted that myself, and it worked pretty well. And that bike took me through 3 tours of Europe, and it was a fantastic bike. But when I started reading about ABS, and I was getting a bit bored with the bike and had a little bit of money in the bank, I then wanted to trade up to a BMW with ABS. And the model I bought, the K75S, is absolutely perfect for me. The right size, the right weight, built-in panniers, top box, ABS. It really was a fantastic bike, and I kept that for 6 years. Did a number of European tours, a number of times up and down to England, commuted to work in it, and I would not have sold it if I hadn't moved to London and didn't need to commute anymore. And the bike fell into a little bit of disuse because I didn't like driving in England and around I didn't like driving around in South London and in England and the southeast. And after a couple of European tours, I decided I was going to sell the bike, and I'd sold it just before I moved to New York. So all things together, it was the right time to get rid of the bike. It was 15 years before I bought another bike, and that was after I'd moved back to Scotland. Poppy had been born, my first child, and I think it was maybe a little bit of stress, a little bit of escapism, that I bought the NC750X. And really what got me into that was I was intrigued about the automatic clutch. I never really liked the using the clutch on the motorbike, and with the automatic TCT it gave me a great entry back into biking. Didn't need it for commuting or anything like that. It was purely for pleasure, purely for the novelty factor, and I really liked it. It got me out of the house, driving around, going for coffees, just visiting places in Scotland on my own. Got me away from the family, the pressures at home, the pressures at work, and that's really what got me back into the biking, is the escapism of getting out of the house. And I found that going on the bike was almost, in fact, I wouldn't say almost, is as good as the meditation. I can't meditate, can't calm my mind enough to meditate, can't sit still for that length of time to actually achieve anything meditation is supposed to achieve. But on the bike, I do find myself getting into a flow, letting my mind wander from subject to subject, not thinking about anything in particular, especially when you're on a twisty road and you're just thinking about the sound of the engine, you're thinking about what speed you're doing, how far you're leaning. It's more of a physical sensation, and that takes away from any sort of rumination and front brain activity, and you're much more into just having a neutral mind and letting your mind control the bike. And so from that point of view, that's how I got hooked back into biking. So after having the NC for nearly 5 years, I wanted to buy a new bike, and it would have been completely missed the bike. I did actually have a bike for a couple of years, and never really gelled with it. It was the BMW F650 GS, and I bought that with a bonus I got from work, because I wanted to try a bike again, and that sort of single cylinder thumper, the vibration, difficulty in driving it. And I was still living in the south, so driving around in the sort of the traffic and the things in South England, it just didn't do much for me. Didn't really enjoy it. I used it for commuting for a little while and would have kept it, but I got a job up in London, and then it didn't use it so much, so I just basically sold it back to the garage, and they were happy to take it because it was in A1 condition. Once I'd had the NC750X for a good 5 years, I wanted to buy a new bike, and I was considering just upgrading, buying the same. But by then they'd brought out the XADV, which is basically the same bike underneath, with a few upgrades, better brakes, and I think an upgraded DCT system, and all the plastics. But it was a scooter, and I wasn't sure about the scooter, so I bought a second-hand Integra, the cheapest that was available on eBay, and I went to London to collect it, and then went to work for a few days, and then drove it home. And that was really to see, well, could I live with a scooter? Could I sit in that way and control the bike? And I found it quite a natural position for me, with a more upright back, sitting with my legs forward. I actually found it much easier to control the bike in that position than leaning forward in a traditional. So I decided to trade in the two bikes I had then, the Integra and the NC750X, and bought so I traded in those bikes against the XADV. And the XADV I kept for 5 years as well. So again, lovely bike, really nice. Got the panniers on it. It really was the best all-round bike I could really hope for. The only negatives about it were the really wide leg stance when stopping. The way that the fairing and the footboards pushed your legs out. It's like sitting on a horse. And it was a difficult bike to get on and off. So those were the only negatives, though. So after riding the automatic clutch, I decided that I would try a manual clutch again. And I looked around, and on the internet I put in a bid against a NC750S, which was being sold from Elgin in Scotland, and a really low bid, won the bike. So I went and collected it, actually took the van and drove it back rather than ride it back. I actually didn't really like the NC750S. I just didn't gel with it at all. But it did convince me that I could ride a bike with a clutch again. And that enabled me to decide to buy a Urban GS, a BMW Urban GS, because I still hanker back to how perfect the BMW was for me, the 750. And I was hoping that the Urban GS could sort of fill that gap. Loved the bike, really beautiful looking bike, and riding it was really exciting. But I was finding that I just didn't have the clutch control for that boxer engine. The boxer engine with so much torque and downshifts, I just could not really get the hang of it, and it was really harsh on the engine, and also the seat was particularly uncomfortable. 100 miles was absolute maximum I could manage on the bike, and also it wouldn't really take any decent luggage. So my time with that bike was cut short, because they brought out the Honda Rebel, And I thought the Honda Rebel, when it's all blacked out looks, was really something which I found very attractive. And the combination of it being DCT versus not being able to ride the BMW as smoothly as I would have liked, I decided to trade in the BMW against the Rebel. So I ended up with two bikes. I had the scooter and the Rebel. So two DCT bikes. So I continued to have the two bikes because they're totally contrasting, and depending on my mood, the weather, where I was going, I would choose between one of the two of them. And then I decided on a whim that I would try out the VFR 1250F because I'd never had a sports bike before. And so I did a search around, and one came up that was absolutely perfect. Low owner, low mileage, absolutely every accessory on it except for a foot shifter. And it was a bit of an adventure for me to go and collect it from Eastbourne. And so I got the VFR, and I really loved that bike. It looks so special with the fairing, the red metallic colour was lovely, really nice to drive, solid going around corners. 170 miles an hour was unbelievable. The engine, the acceleration, everything about that bike really showed why it was Honda's flagship at the time. But the DCT was absolutely awful on it. If you were running in drive mode, it would be in 6th gear, and the engine would be barely ticking over, and you then have to blip it down yourself to actually bring up the revs so that you could move along. But then if you put it in sports mode, it was an absolute monster, and you'd be bunny hopping along, and so there was just too much of a gap between drive and sport. So I bought the foot shifter. It came from Hungary, and I bought it on eBay. It must have been one of the last foot shifters available. I've never seen one come up again. And I put that on it, and it made a big difference to the bike, being able to just use the foot shifter to control the bike, and I was running it in manual mode. So what I ended up doing was running with a quick shifter effectively, and that made me think, well, if I can get on with a quick shifter, and that on the VFR 1250, that opened up other bikes that had quick shifters, and what could I do with what could I choose from all the bikes with quick shifters? Because what I was sitting on was 3 bikes with DCT. So at that time I had the XADV, I had the Honda Rebel, and I had the VFR 1200F, and that was the beginning of 2024. So I decided to think about which bike was the best bike for me in 2024, and sell the other 2 and buy a bike with a quick shifter. So I thought about, well, when you look at this, how to score a bike, how to decide which bikes to sell, I wanted to think about not really about the technology, not really about the bike and how it looks, but think about how I was deciding which bike to take out on which rides, and which rides I was doing most often. And mostly I was commuting up and down to Edinburgh once a week on the bike. So the VFR was absolutely the best bike for that. The XADV came a very close second, and I never actually took the Rebel to Edinburgh once as a commute to work. Then there was the usual trip around the block to Tesco's in Blairgowrie, and all 3 bikes were really good for doing that. But the XADV was probably the first choice because of the SW Motec 45 litre panniers meant I could actually do some shopping while I was there. And I realised that the big panniers on XADV were actually one of the deciding factors about going somewhere, because if I needed any sort of practicality, that was the first choice. The VFR with the panniers, although they look fantastic, the odd shape on the inside actually limits the capacity quite significantly. And the Rebels got SW Motec SLC carriers, and they're okay, but I think the bags are again pretty limited. So looking at other rides, just popping out for a coffee over the hills to Ranach or over the hills to Aberfeldy. Those are twisty roads, single track, and when you're on that kind of ride, the VFR was last choice. It's just too powerful and too eager to actually enjoy the Scottish hill roads. And the suspension was okay, didn't find that a problem. But there's just so much capability and capacity there that wasn't being used. And with the weight, there were certain roads, such as the road between Crieff and Aberfeldy via Kenmore is very choppy and very steep in places, and I just wouldn't take the VFR down that road. So it lost a lot of points on certain routes. The XADV came close second, but the bike that actually suited nearly every ride that I do was the Rebel, and that's because it's probably the easiest bike to ride I've ever owned. The seating position for me is perfect, that low seating height, the power of the engine, the smoothness of the upgraded third or maybe even fourth generation DCT, and the looks of the bike. I mean, it just came out top on pretty much every category, and was either first or second on every ride category apart from motorway. So the Rebel won out, which meant that I actually sold the VFR to WeBuyAnyBike.com. They came and collected it, took it away, got a reasonable price for that after trying to sell it privately and getting different prices from local garages. I've not missed it. It's a lovely bike, but the character of the engine for me was just too powerful, too quiet. So I've not missed that. I have missed the XADV. I think just that practicality. Great workhorse, feels like a horse. So I have missed that, but I think I've replaced it with an absolutely solid bike, and I traded in the XADV for a BMW R1250R, and really what got me thinking about that was BMW bringing out their automatic clutch on the GS 1300. Now, I did get a test drive of that, and I didn't think it was the right bike for me. A big adventure bike, I'm not really sure. I could have, but the price and the size of the bike, although it's an improvement on the previous generations, it does actually feel quite slim, and it's a good looking bike. I didn't get a chance to test the automatic though, and I did want to swap, so I thought the 1250R was a better choice for me, and I am very pleased with that. Then the Hunter came out, and one came up for sale, and I was in the mood for a trip, so I went and bought it. No, I bought it over the internet, and went and collected it and drove it home. And it's a lovely little bike, and it is a complete contrast. So I've moved from 3 DCT bikes to keeping one DCT. I've got a quick shifter on the R1250R, and I've got the manual on the Hunter. 3 different manufacturers now, 3 different styles of bike. if I'm going to get down to one bike at the end of the 2025 season, it's going to be a really difficult choice on which one needs to go. I think the Rebel was an easier choice. I think this year it would be difficult to choose from any one of the three, but I think 3 bikes is too much, and 2 maybe, but ideally I think I'd like to get down to 1 bike. It's going to have to be a pretty special bike to replace any one of those 3, and if I was going to just keep 1 bike out of those 3, I honestly don't know which one it would be, but I'm going to make that evaluation during the 2025 season. So that's my biking history. Thank you very much for listening, but I'm going to end it there, and goodbye.